Hello, everybody. We're going to be starting very shortly. We're just waiting for any people who are lagging a little bit to join us. In the meantime, I'm going to tell you that I'm speaking to you from Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory in Ottawa. And if others of you would like to do land acknowledgement as well in the chat, you're welcome to do so, or invited to do so. I'm going to leave that at that. And you also have on the screen there the PowerPoint that I plan to use. I'll wait a couple more minutes, then I'll introduce myself a little bit more fully, and then we'll dive right in. How are we doing for participants, Gisela? I see that with my screen being shared, I don't actually have the access to the buttons.
26 right now, Real. I'll just say hello. It's Gisela here. I'm a board member of Fair Vote Canada, and I'm going to be offering tech support today. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and the chat we can just use as we always do to introduce ourselves at the beginning or whatever. So we're at 29. We're still going up reasonably quick. Give it another minute or so, Real.
Yeah, for sure. That's already a pretty good group. I'm really pleased. One of the things that I've been noticing here in Ottawa is quite a few people seem to be signing up. I've seen in my own riding, there are 3 of us. Ottawa Centre's got 5 or 6 already. So maybe when people are asking questions, are people going to be able to speak, or is it just written questions and answers today?
We won't be able to have people speak because it's a webinar format. So questions for Real anytime, go ahead and put them into the Q&A. And otherwise, just in the chat, for example, just introducing yourselves now. But if it's actually a question that you would like Real, our presenter tonight, to answer, then please do put them in the Q&A, not the chat.
Yeah, and Gisela will be monitoring the questions, and then she will pose them to me. So that's going to take the load off me a little bit, and I appreciate that. Yeah, I believe that in a webinar format, you have to make somebody co-host if they're going to speak, right? Which is a little bit awkward, so.
Yeah, no, we're just going to use the Q&A tonight.
Yeah, okay. And that helps keep the duration of the meeting down as well, because people aren't going to want to listen to me too long anyway. So last year, just about a year ago, we did one of these for MP meetings in the context of the Proc motion on the Citizens Assembly. And that meeting went a little less than an hour. So we can expect tonight that we'll probably be done in an hour or less. If there's a lot of questions and it goes a little longer, fine, but I'm aiming for something under an hour, maybe 45 minutes, 50 minutes, something like that. Now I can see the chat. All right, I'm going to get going then. I'll just say a few words about myself. I've been a volunteer with Fair Vote Canada since 2013. I joined the board in 2014. I was a board member for 5 years. I was president for 5 years. I was a board member longer than that, I guess closer to 6 or 7 years. And the thing is, because I live in Ottawa, and also because I was wearing the hat of presidents for quite a long time, I've met with a lot of MPs or MPPs at one time or another, probably several dozen, I would think. So I do have quite a lot of experience, and some of that experience is what I want to share with you tonight in terms of insights on how to run a successful meeting. I want to say right off the top, this is actually one of the more enjoyable activities that you can do as a volunteer. It's kind of stressful at first. You don't know how this is going to go, and it's kind of intimidating. I remember when I had my meeting with Pierre Poilievre, who's known to be a little bit of a bulldog in Parliament. I was extremely nervous, and in fact, at that time there were things going on. The so-called Fair Election Act that I was quite angry about. I thought it was going to be like a conflictual kind of meeting. It turned out it was totally enjoyable. It was one of the best meetings that I've ever had, and I think that's what you can anticipate. Politicians need to be nice to you. They want voters, they want people to support them, and they're used to being nice. And That's what you can expect from these meetings. What you want to avoid, and I'll mention this right off the top, I'll maybe mention it again later on, but right off the top, what you want to avoid is getting into argumentation. If you start arguing, then you're putting the candidate on the defensive, and somebody who's on the defensive is not in a very good position to be convinced about anything. So that's the main thing that you want to be careful about. I remember even my very, very first meeting with John Baird, who at the time was Minister of Foreign Affairs, and cringing at the way some of my colleagues in that meeting were in fact getting into an argument with him, trying to convince him what the truth was and what was right. I kind of felt that wasn't working. So that's one of the things that we need to be very careful about. And so I'll start with that takeaway and then lead in now to my PowerPoint presentation. So I've called it Keys to a Successful Ontario Liberal Candidate Meeting. And so this is pitched specifically to meeting Liberals for the Ontario election, Liberal candidates. So that makes it a little bit easier, but it also means that you're going to approach some of the speaking points a little bit differently than you would if you're talking to an NDP or a Green or a Conservative. So we'll try to take that into account. And the way I'm going to do it, which I think will be most useful for you, is this is a very long looking outline, but basically it's a step-by-step guide to being part of a successful candidates meeting. And these are simply the various points that I'm going to talk you through, starting with getting a meeting all the way through to doing a postmortem and a follow-up report. And then I've got this little annex on talking points, which we can get to if we have time. I'll simply show you the slides, and we can get back to them later on if you want to have a closer look at them. But basically, my presentation would be from points 1 to 8 here, and I'll talk you through each of them one at a time. So first of all, with regards to getting a meeting, this is a little bit different from when you're meeting with an MP. Because most of the candidates, you're going to have trouble finding their phone number or an email address. So there's a difference here between interviewing incumbents, so people who are already MPPs, and new candidates. The incumbents, you can just Google them and you'll find the information in the Queen's Park information, and their constituency office information will be there. There'll be a phone number you can call. They'll have a constituency office. Everything's just like with a regular meeting with an MP or MPP as usual. New candidates, some of them will already have campaign offices. Then you have to figure out how to get the phone number for that campaign office. Maybe you know somebody, maybe you know where it is, maybe you'll have to drop in, or else you might have to explore on Facebook. Usually on Facebook, you'll find an email address, or Google it, see what you can find. I mean, they want to be able to be approachable, obviously, but I haven't always found it as easy as I might to find the coordinates for new candidates. So that's going to take a little bit of sleuthing. The first step might be to find out who your candidate is for the Liberal Party, if you don't already know. But those are available in Wikipedia. And I've got the link here. By the way, I don't know if Gisela has already put the link of this slideshow in the chat. What you want to do is you want to pick up the link there, so that you can then, I mean, you don't need to open up the slides now, but you want the link for later on so you can get access to all the links that I've included in the slideshow. This is meant to be a resource for you. This slideshow will be available on the Google Drive at any time, provided that you have the link. So just be sure to put it on there, Gisela, and the rest of you can just copy it in and then paste it into your computer or whatever works for you. Maybe Anita will also send it to you by email afterwards, so that would make it maybe even easier. You don't have to worry about cutting and pasting. So anyway, this link takes you to Wikipedia. I'm not going to open it here, but you'll see how it's very nicely organized. Every riding in the province is there, and for every riding in the province, you're going to have the candidates that have already been nominated for each of the parties, including the Liberals. So you get the name. You might get a link from there. Sometimes they have a web page, and you can take it from there. And then, but the thing is, you've got to find a phone number and an email address. Usually it's going to be an email address. And in any case, whenever you're calling for a meeting, they're going to ask you to send an email. So you might as well send the email first. and then wait a day or two. Don't wait too long because then the email will get lost. They're not going to be calling you back normally. You have to call them. But when you do call, refer to the email. Say that you're a constituent. That's really important. They're going to give more priority to your call, knowing that you're a constituent for sure. Refer to the email. So normally, if you give them the email address on the phone, they'll look it up right there online, and they'll be looking at it while you talk. But you also want to make the case of why you would like to meet with the candidate. You might, if you already know that there are some other people, you might say there are 3 or 4 of us who'd like to meet with the candidate, and then mention the issue that you want to talk about. You want to talk about electoral reform, and in particular, the idea of a citizens' assembly going into the next government. And you'd like to see the Liberals putting that on their campaign platform. You'd like to talk to the candidate about that. So that's essentially your spiel. It has to be, compelling. They can't meet everybody, and so the more you can make your appeal compelling, the more you're likely to get the meeting that you want. Chances are you'll have to email or call again afterwards. Often the person who answers, who will be the person who's responsible for managing appointments, will want to talk to the candidate first and then get back to you, but they might not get back to you. So it's good to call again the next day and call again the day after that. And then once you have a date, this is important. Once you have a date, that's the time to recruit more people, because that's the hard part. Getting the appointment is actually the hardest part. So if you've achieved that, a lot of people want to go for the ride, because this is the fun part now. The actual meeting is really fun. It's a great activity. I have fond memories of many of these meetings, and I'm sure you will as well. And so it's easy to recruit more people once you have the appointment. So that's your last step. And then in terms of the number of people, I think 3 or 4 is a very good number to have. If you can get more than that, that's great. But I've never had more than, I think 11 was the maximum we ever had, which was a meeting with Catherine McKenna. So that's getting a meeting. You have to prepare, obviously. You don't just go into a meeting cold. You might have half an hour. If you're lucky, you'll get 45 minutes, but usually it's between half an hour, 45 minutes that you'll get. Sometimes it's only 20 minutes, depending what else they have on their schedule. So you want to be ready, and you want to make the best use of your time possible. The first source of information I always go to is do a search of the riding in Wikipedia. You're going to find out who won the last time, by what margins, get some idea of how much of a chance your Liberal candidate has going into this election. That's going to be important. Google a candidate so you can find as much information as you can about the candidate himself or herself before you go in. They may have a website, so check that out. Then there's the material that you're getting from Anita, and now I'm adding some of my own as well. But Anita's material is the one to start with. She's got both a leader's guide and a tip sheet. And I think there's overlap between those two. I did read them both, but I don't remember how much overlap there is. But the tip sheets for everybody. The leader's guide is meant to provide special guidance for the person who's leading the meeting with the candidate in that riding. And then here's a couple that I've added myself. The second bullet here, Del Duca in his own words, is a transcript of the leadership speech that he made at the annual general meeting of the Ontario Liberals last October. But it's just the part that deals with the electoral reform. And I've highlighted there the passages that are most relevant for us. I think being familiar with what Del Duca actually said would be useful. You can get a précis from Anita's message, of course, but I think it's useful to read what the leader had to say when you're talking to Liberals who probably will already know, or they may want to know what the leader had to say. So be familiar with it. It's not very long. It's like a page and a half or something like that. And then the third one is PR from an Ontario Liberal Party point of view. This is a little document that I've produced. It's not as short as you might think. It's 4 or 5 pages long. And it's basically making the case for PR specifically for the leader of the Liberal Party and the Ontario Liberal Party. So this is a document that's actually been prepared. It's the kind of document you'd want to share with the candidates, and you're welcome to do so. This link can be shared as widely as you want. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that as well, to get that Ontario perspective. One of the things I forgot to mention is that I've actually been working very much with the Liberal Party myself. I chair a group called Revitalizing Our Democracy, which is a group of people who are sympathetic to the Liberal Party. Some of them are members, some of them are not, but they want to have this dialogue on electoral reform, specifically with the Liberal Party. And that's what we've been doing for about 18 months, which is another reason why I'm the one making this presentation today. I have a lot of experience talking with Liberals. And then I've added here, Anita, I hope you don't mind, your slide deck on citizens' assemblies in both English and French as a supplementary resource that people can use. And of course, we've got the Citizens' Assembly website as well, and there's no shortage of material on citizens' assemblies if people want to find it on our website. So we're still going to preparations. You also want to get to know each other. You can do so by email, by phone. And usually you'll meet before the meeting, and it can be a Zoom meeting, because right now in-person meetings might be a little bit more complicated. If it was an in-person meeting, which who knows, maybe there will be in-person meetings before very long, then normally what we would do is meet in a cafe just before, a half an hour before, so that you can assign roles, talk about what major speaking points are going to be, who's going to do most of the talking, that kind of stuff. And I've written that here in the last bullet, assign roles, who's the coordinator. You want to have a note taker, and we've said photographer. In this case, it'd be somebody who'd do a screenshot, and you'll see later on how we use that screenshot near the end of the meeting. Basically, to be part of your report, it's nice to have a little screenshot, and then you put the names of all the people who were there. It's really cool, and I'll give you an example of that. It's a link. I won't show it on my screen, but you'll be able to go to the link and see how we did it. And I think it's really quite cool. But you want to make sure you have a note taker. That'd be the person who'd be responsible for writing at least a first draft of the report in collaboration with others. So that's preparations. That's before you've even gotten to your meeting. This I've already covered a little bit. This idea of general observations. When you think of your role there, you're there as a citizen to express your concerns and also to hear I should have put MPP's views here rather than MPs, but you know what I mean, or the candidates' views. So what you're after is having a pleasant conversation, basically, with people. You want to be supportive. If you happen to be a Liberal supporter, you probably want to say so, because not only are you then a potential voter, but you might also be prepared to support the candidate financially or as a volunteer. If that's an option, you probably want to mention it. So they want to know who their allies are. So, I mean, I wouldn't go out there and flag that, I'm an NDP member, or I'm a Green member, or I'm a Conservative Party member. But if you are a Liberal member, you should say so. Try to establish that particular rapport. I wrote here, engage in a dialogue. My approach to this is always whatever the candidate in this case says, expresses their concerns and their points of view. I always try to find something in there that I can agree with, and rather than saying, but, and I try to avoid the word but altogether. I might talk more about a nuance or something like that, and try to build on what they've said. That's a good point, and so if you can do that, that'd be great. You can, of course, you can add, but again, that whole idea of trying to avoid getting into a back and forth argument, that's probably not going to get you very far. So basically, you're trying to build together for the benefit of our democracy, for the benefit of the Liberal Party to some extent, and just for the public good in general. Have an ask. Now, in this case, the ask may be very fluid, and you'll see how I've proposed to word that ask later on. But nonetheless, you're there, you're taking up their time. What do you want from them? You've got to tell them what it is that you're expecting them to do. And finally, in terms of general observations, you want to manage your time very, very carefully. If you only have 20 minutes or you have half an hour, you can't afford to waste it. You have to use every minute as well as possible. And I think that's my next slide, is about time management. I've called it time management in 4 parts. So this is how the typical successful meeting works in these four parts. So first part is just getting to know each other. So you don't dive right in. you make a little chit chat at the beginning, back and forth. You might even go to the meeting with some ideas of things that you want to introduce, that you want to talk about, that would help to break the ice, basically. And you also want to spend a little bit of time. Oh no, wait a minute, I'm going too fast here. So that I've actually indicated here what you can say, thanking them for the meeting. Try to clarify how much time you've actually got ahead of time. I always ask that. And usually if I'm going into a meeting, I'm the one who's leading on that meeting. So whoever's leading for your meeting, that's the person who asks how much time, and it's their responsibility to make sure that you're using your time as efficiently as possible. It's also the leader who will do this next spot here, which is the general idea. Why are we here? And I think that the general point we want to make, and you can do it differently if you like, but I would stress the huge opportunity that presents itself right now in Ontario to finally make some progress on electoral reform because of the alignment of all three political opposition parties in favor of electoral reform of some sort. Now, they may have different ideas, but all three political parties now are speaking about the need for electoral reform, including the Liberals. So the question is how to make this happen. And I wrote here in brackets the hook. What you're trying to make this meeting sound important for this person, right? You want to, this is something to be excited about, something that we really want to be talking about together. And then you open it up to quick introductions, and it has to be really quick. If you only have 20 minutes, you got 6 people there, you can't have people making these long speeches. But basically in the introductions, who you are, if you happen to have a connection with the candidate, mention that candidate. I remember we met a couple of years ago, whatever comes up, that makes that personal connection. And then talk about why you care about this issue. I think that's important. They need to understand that these people that are in the room are people who care a lot about this issue, and therefore they don't want to ignore this issue because there are voters and constituents who are passionate about it. Maybe people who might want to contribute as volunteers or financially or whatever, right? So that's what you want to try to put forward in this introduction section. And then they will invite you a lot of the time. They're watching the clock and so on and say, okay, so what's your pitch? They use that expression all the time. So you might as well use it. What's your pitch? And this, again, it would probably be the leader who makes the basic pitch. And in this case, it's about the opportunity. It's about the importance of process, because if we get the process right, that's how we'll finally get the electoral reform that we need. Notice I'm talking about electoral reform here, not proportional representation necessarily. The Citizens Assembly will be on electoral reform. It will include other options than proportional representation. It might include the status quo. It probably would include the alternative vote, which is not a proportional system. So we use the expression electoral reform when talking to Liberals. We might want to say a little bit about why electoral reform has failed in the past and talk about the pattern where politicians, when they're in opposition and the system is working against them, they advocate for electoral reform, but then they get elected under the current system, and now all of a sudden their ardor for electoral reform fails. And that's what's happened in the past, and that's why getting the process right and putting the issue to what we're going to call we'll be calling for a citizens assembly, putting the issue of a citizens process forward early on by the Liberals as well as the other parties, even before the election ideally, would be really important to making progress, because other formulas simply have not worked very well in the past. And then the third part is, I've called it engagement here. I should have called it discussion. Maybe it's an easier term. So this is like your wide open conversation with the candidate. I think what would happen here is that the leader would ask the candidate whether the candidate is familiar with the Citizens Assembly idea. By then you would have figured out a way to weave it in better than I've just done. Did they have questions about how it works? And what does the candidate, again, I forget to change the word to candidate, what does the candidate think about this idea in general? So that kind of opening would allow the candidate to engage a conversation with you. If they have concerns, I think this is the time also to ask them for any concerns that you might like to address. And then either by this point, you've probably already talked about your ask. Basically, and that should be part of the pitch actually, that you would like the candidate's assistants to help spread the word about this idea of emphasizing process with regard to how we're going to get electoral reform. And you're going to be talking at some point about the importance of having process over this promise of the alternative vote. I have that in the speaking points rather than having put it here, so we'll get back to it. So you'll be asking them in the ask, which is near the end of the meeting, what they think they can do to help and whether they'd like more information. So that opens the door to ongoing dialogue with them. So those are the 4 steps: getting to know each other, the pitch, discussion, and then finally the ask and closing the meeting. And you've got to get all this in about 20 minutes to half an hour or something like that. So it's got to be done very efficiently. I've given here some examples of speaking points for the discussion period or for the main presentation. And I would suggest that you write these out and own them. Not these ones, but your own points, the ones you want to emphasize. So you'll read the material that you got from Anita, listen to what I've got to say over here, talk about it with your colleagues, and then make your list. These are the points that I want to make, and try to find a place where you're going to make those points. So I've got here 6, 7 points. First of all, that all opposition parties agree on all the opposition parties agree on the need for reform. They may not agree as between ranked ballots, which Del Duca has been advocating, or different types of proportional representation. But what they could certainly do is agree on process. And so the process that Fairvote Canada has been putting forward is the idea of a citizens' assembly, handing it over to citizens themselves to recommend what they would like to see as citizens in terms of the way that we vote. And this has considerable advantages for politicians themselves on handling an issue like this, because politicians are in a very awkward position after they've been elected under the current system. They're going to want to retain that system, and they're in a conflict of interest. So having a citizens' assembly is one way to overcome that conflict of interest and puts politicians in a much more comfortable place than when they have to deal with an issue that they feel conflicted about. So you see how I've put that here, and this is what I wrote in red in my slide. You have to be really careful not to be accusing them of being in a conflict of interest. You're sympathizing with their plight of being in a conflict of interest and having to deal with that. They need to find a way to deal with that in what they consider to be an ethical and responsible way. And I actually got in a little bit of trouble with when I introduced this with our interview with Greg Fergus, who's on PROC now. He felt taken aback and defensive. So you have to find a way to put it that doesn't make them feel defensive, but they have to acknowledge, it's really important that they acknowledge that they are in a conflict of interest. They have to acknowledge it to themselves. They have to acknowledge that they need to find a solution to this problem if we're ever going to make progress on electoral reform. And doing this right could help the Liberals win votes and recover some credibility on this file as a champion of democracy and as a champion of a new way of doing politics, which is what Del Duca has said that he wants to do. So you've got to do it right. And this is where the idea of a pivot comes in. In order to do it right, the Liberal Party is going to have to pivot from an approach which is currently focused on selling one particular model, ranked ballots, which isn't even a proportional model, towards an approach which sells a process, which is handing it over to citizens so that citizens can tell us what it is that they want as citizens in an electoral reform. And from that perspective, it's really the Citizens' Assembly that's a key to success. It's really a Citizens' Assembly that would win votes for the Liberals. Then I'll skip the rest of it, but I have more points on this in the annex and the other supporting documentation that you've received. So do have a look at that. Make sure you digest this material very well, and that you're able to make a very compelling case in a very short period of time when your turn comes. So those are your speaking, those are some ideas of speaking points. But these are my speaking points, the ones that I would emphasize. And I think this is very similar to what Anita emphasizes also in her tip sheets. So it's going to be something like this for sure, but I think you want to write it and organize it for yourself so that you're comfortable with it and you own it. The ask, as I pointed earlier, is both the first and the last item to cover. So you want to repeat the ask twice, once at the beginning, once at the end. You say it at the beginning, so it gives direction to the meeting. You say it at the end, so it gives direction for after the meeting. So that's really important. It's basically, we're asking them to help put a citizens assembly on the Ontario Liberal Party election platform to prepare the ground for a quick start on a citizens assembly in collaboration with other parties after the elections. It's very likely that if the Liberals do this, the NDP and the Greens will also have a citizens assembly on their platform. We expect they will anyway, but there are gains for the Liberal Party to be made by showing some leadership on this. They want to attract voters. Showing leadership on this issue is the way to do that. And a citizens assembly is going to attract voters a lot more than advocating for the ranked ballot, which is likely to be seen by voters as being self-interested on the part of the Liberal Party. So turn it around, put the citizens assembly first. If the leadership still wants to talk about ranked ballots, they can certainly do so, but the priority in terms of the electoral promise has to be the citizens assembly, putting it into the hands of citizens themselves. And so what we're asking of the candidate is whether there's anything you can do to encourage your colleagues to make this an electoral issue. Yeah, just I got a little note to myself here that this, you don't want to be too prescriptive in terms of telling them exactly what they must do, because what they can do is really more up to them. It's they're the ones who are going to decide. But I do understand that the candidates have regular meetings with each other and with the leadership. So there'll be plenty of opportunity for them to raise this in one of the meetings if they want to, or they'll be able to do it by email. I'm sure they have the email address of the campaign committee and they can write to them. So you can leave it open to them to, and you may ask them, what do you think you could do? Can you tell us, and then ask them what they might still need in terms of supportive material from you that you might be able to provide as well. So, and this is where we get the, so when you're wrapping up, you say thank you and so on, try to show some enthusiasm about how this has been a great meeting, really enjoyed it, that kind of stuff, very positive. But do note if there are gaps in the candidate's knowledge, and note any questions that you can't answer for follow-up. Normally what you would want to do afterwards is somebody would want to write an email follow-up with additional material or additional points that maybe weren't made as well as you might have liked, or that came up and that you didn't have time to address. So you can ask, what could we send you? What would you be interested? What would you like to have? And then I think it's very polite and interesting to ask for that screenshot that I was talking about with the candidate. It makes the candidate feel valued, makes them feel the meeting was valued. So if you get a minute to do that, that'd be great. If it was an in-person meeting, then you just take a photo, which is very nice to have as a souvenir. And then the meeting's over, but you're not done. Every meeting should have some sort of postmortem. You should sit down together if you can. You could have another little short Zoom meeting to follow, for example, and then talk again right away afterwards on your separate Zoom meeting. If it's a Zoom meeting that's organized by the candidate, then staying on afterwards, maybe it'll be recorded. So I think it probably would be better to have your own separate meeting if you can. If there's any follow-up that's required, decide who, if you're going to write a new email or send material, who's going to do that? Decide who that should be. You will have identified a note taker ahead of time. You want to do a report. And what I've done here is I gave you a link to a report which is a very, very detailed one. This is probably the most thorough report of any meeting that I've ever been in. So it's kind of like raising the bar a little too high. It might intimidate people, but use that as an idea of how to structure your report. And you can decide for yourselves how much to put in. I mean, it can be just a couple of paragraphs, but I think it's really important to have a report for yourselves. You'll see in this case, there are actually 2 meetings reported. And we've had something like 4 meetings with Greg Fergus. This is a meeting with Greg Fergus. And having that record of meetings from one to the other has been extremely valuable to us. And of course, it's valuable to Anita, who tries to keep tabs on what people have had to say and what their concerns are and so on. And if you're part of a chapter, then these are things that you can share with other members of the chapter, with people who are doing meetings in other ridings in your general area. I think they would find that useful. So you have to be careful how you word it. If you're including sensitive material, then you don't want to share it too widely. Usually when I write a report myself, if I'm responsible, I just write it in a way that's not going to be problematic if ever it leaks, whatever. If it goes to more people than I might have thought, there's nothing embarrassing in there for anybody. There's no confidential information. So just be careful how you write it up, and then you can share it as widely as you feel comfortable with by adjusting the access rights to whatever you're comfortable with. And then do follow up, at the very least, with a thank you email, but also any postmortem thoughts or resource documents that you have to share. And usually what I do is I will actually include that follow-up email as part of my report. So you'll have the report will include background information, and then it'll have what the pitch was, who was there, how the discussion went, and then some general conclusions, and then the follow-up email. All that will be part of the same report. I do it in a Google Doc. Other people who came to the meeting will add to it. And then the nice thing about Google Doc is after you've shared it, if you find typos or you find you realize, oh, I should have talked about such and such a thing and I didn't, well, you can still go and fix that at any time. So that's extremely useful as a way to do things. So that's it. I think I've been talking for a while, so I'll just wait and see what the questions are, but I just want to show you what else I've included here in the PowerPoint that I think you may find useful in terms of further talking points. So I'll just go through this really quickly, but I could maybe go into it more detail later on. So the first one is some talking points about the ranked ballot. I think it's almost surely going to come up. In fact, it should come up. We're asking them to pivot away from the alternative vote, AV, or ranked ballots, towards a process-based commitment in their campaign platform. That is our ask. That is our central ask. So obviously, the issue of AV and the pros and cons of it might come up, but you don't want to get into a detailed discussion of the pros and cons of AV in a meeting like this. That would be a recipe for getting into an argument. You don't want to do that. What I always say is, there are definitely positive things to be said about ranked ballots. You can have ranked ballots either as part of a first past the post kind of system, not exactly that, but as a winner take all system, or you can have it as part of the proportional system. But really, it's not up to us in this meeting to decide what's best in terms of systems. That's what we would expect the Citizens Assembly to deal with. And I kind of sweep it under the rug that way. But I think it'd be important to acknowledge that in Del Duca's original promise, what he puts forward first is the ranked ballot. And then he also mentions the Citizens Assembly, but it's kind of an also ran. So our proposal to reverse that is actually quite significant and important. And we think it would be politically important for the Liberals to do that, in large part because the ranked ballot is going to be tainted as a self-interested move by the Liberal Party if they put that forward as their only thing. If they put it forward instead that we're going to hand it over to citizens themselves to recommend what they want, we do have a preference for ranked ballots. They could say that as well. They could make the case, but don't put that forward as the main promise. The main promise should definitely be the Citizens Assembly. I think that would be a much greater winner for the Liberals. And the Liberals want to win just like anybody else. So wording it in those terms is totally appropriate. It's a Citizens Assembly is a more winning formula than advocating for ranked ballots. I think ranked ballots is definitely a loser. And also, it's contradictory for Del Duca to claim that he wants to work with other parties and to also say that he's going to bring in ranked ballots, because none of the other parties are going to want ranked ballots. So if he's serious about wanting to work with other parties, he's serious about doing politics differently, and if he's at all serious about democratic reform, then sorry, my phone is ringing. That's a bit distracting. The wise thing for him to do is really to put the Citizens Assembly first. He has talked about, so there's one last point here. The last point that can be made is that he spoke about a ranked ballot as a first step, which there's a certain logic to that. It's not something that I would advocate for, but if it's going to be a first step, let's make sure that it's a first step. And let's make sure that it's the Citizens Assembly that proposes it. So if the Citizens Assembly wants to propose an incremental approach to change, whether it's with ranked ballots as a first step or anything else, that should be part of its mandate, that it should be invited to, if they want, propose an incremental approach. And if they do, what they would propose in terms of an ongoing citizens review process to make sure that whatever is proposed as a first step or a second step or whatever is proposed incrementally is really just a first step of an incremental approach. So that's really important. And now I've really talked too long. I hadn't planned to speak so long on this one, but I think it was useful and valuable to do so. The other two that I have, one is about what a Citizens Assembly is and how it works. You want to make sure that you're familiar with the major components before you go in. That's all available in Anita's material. I've just typed in a few important points here. And then I've added another slide, which I think is going to be more useful in the future than it has been in the past, because we've never really developed such a slide before. But often people will come back at you and say, well, you know what, we've had citizens assemblies before. In Ontario, we had a citizens assembly. It didn't give us reform. So was that enough? Is there a problem? And so what I've done here is that I've included some of the things that we need acknowledgement for by all of the parties going into the election. Acknowledgement that there's a problem, acknowledgement that there's a conflict of interest issue, identification of democratic principles, a commitment to convene a citizens assembly for sure, within a particular timeline. Here I've said within 6 months, a commitment to act on those recommendations, an open mandate for the citizens assembly, the possibility of recommending an incremental approach, and no referendum unless it's strongly advised by the citizens assembly itself. So I think this gives you a more complete menu than just saying, yeah, we want a citizens assembly. It's a lot more than that. And having this in your back pocket, I think, could be very useful. And what I've added a link here, which is a sample text with a fuller statement of what is needed in terms of an agreement across party lines. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop my shared screen. And if somebody was trying to call me, I'm going to try to find out who that was.
Real, there are some really good questions here about the candidate visits. I'll start with this one. How do you handle a situation where a colleague starts to argue or the candidate becomes defensive?
Yeah, the leader has an important role to play in that respect. So one can diplomatically intervene. I mean, just answering this in the abstract is really challenging. I might say something to the effect, well, we don't need to argue about that today, something like that. As if I was the leader of a group, I would try to shut it down in that respect. But I would also, before, when we have the pre-meeting on Zoom, emphasize this idea of not getting into arguments with the candidate, and to back off if it's starting to look like it's going to develop into an argument.
Great, thank you. And the next question is, what if the candidate starts to talk about putting it to a referendum? That's usually a tactic to kill the idea without being seen to kill it.
Yeah, I think I might mention that at least federally, the Liberal Party has come out against a referendum. We can mention that it was a referendum that killed the electoral reform process in 2007. Definitely didn't work out. Um, and basically, what we're looking at with the Citizens Assembly is a substitute for a referendum, which allows citizens to express themselves. This is a representative assembly of citizens to express themselves after having become very educated on the subject and after deliberating amongst themselves. So there are some really good arguments to avoid a referendum. What we're proposing here is an ongoing citizens review process. If you wanted to be able to revisit, you have to have a process for revisiting how something is going. But I think there's a pretty large consensus now that a referendum is really not the way to go. And I would say that consensus is pretty widespread within the Liberal Party as well, and certainly also in the NDP and the Greens. Where you're going to get pressure for a referendum is likely to be from the Conservatives, but they're going to be harder pressed if you have a very good formula for a citizens assembly followed up by an ongoing citizens review process. Then it's much harder to make the case for a referendum. You need to have something to legitimize the process. And I think what we have here, particularly with this last slide that I had there about going even beyond, just calling for a citizens assembly, but going into some of the detail as well, makes it very, very clear that this is a highly legitimate process and a very sound recipe for improving over time. Fall back, have a referendum after 2 or 3 elections with the new system for sure, but I don't even think that's necessarily a great idea.
Thanks, Rael. Another question is, should we be transparent with a candidate that we're coming from Fair Vote Canada?
Yes, we're going there as advocates for electoral reform. Where we're being perhaps a little less transparent is when we're talking about electoral reform rather than proportional representation. I think with Liberals, you're better off talking about electoral reform. But saying you're a volunteer with Fair Vote Canada, but you're there as a constituent with your own preferences and your own passions and concerns, and that's what you're there for. You're not going there to be just a mouthpiece of Fair Vote Canada. I wouldn't put it that way. So go there as your own person as well.
All right, thank you. What was the next one here? What are the objections to citizens' assemblies that we should expect to hear from Ontario Liberals?
Yeah, I don't know to what extent there's so much objections as a certain lack of comfort when you first come across this idea of a citizens assembly. A lot of people think that this is the job of politicians to sort through what citizens want and come up with a solution. And the answer to that is, well, that hasn't worked. But even so, they might also think, well, maybe an expert commission would make more sense. A lot of people will think that this is a complex issue. It shouldn't be left just to ordinary citizens to sort out. What's the role of experts? And I think the answer then is that we're not leaving the citizens entirely to their own devices here. They will have access to all of the expert support that they could want. It's even possible, and they can think about that if they want, but it's even possible to have a citizens assembly and also in parallel have an expert commission. That's been known to happen as well. So if there are those concerns, I think we have to simply answer them as best we can. Experience has shown that citizens are quite capable of coming up with well-reasoned choices, and very remarkably, citizens are capable of overcoming partisan differences. You may have people going into this who happen to be conservatives or NDPers or Greens or Liberals or something else. But the way the process works, where you start by focusing on democratic principles, agreeing on democratic principles, and then from there, trying to establish a consensus, surprisingly, they come up with a fairly strong consensus, usually above 90%, voting in favor of what the Citizens Assembly has decided to put forward. So until I hear what the concerns are, it's really hard to say, but I think the general concern has to be this kind of discomfort with what ordinary citizens can do, and also the new way of making decisions that this involves. Isn't this something that politicians are supposed to do? And that's where that vested interest argument really comes into play. You can't avoid that issue. You've got to put it out there that there's a problem. There's a systemic flaw in our model to reforming the way we vote, which is we're assigning it to the people who were elected according to the old system. That doesn't work. It's proven not to work. It hasn't worked in 100 years. So we have to do things differently. We can be creative about exactly how we want to do it, but it's got to be done differently.
Right. So here's a question. What do you think of following Kate Graham's proposal for a binding citizens assembly so that it doesn't get referred back to a committee that can alter any recommendation?
Okay, well, what we're asking is very similar to what Kate has put forward, and Kate, of course, is a huge ally in the Liberal Party on this file. She's the one who's really moved this forward. I think our group, Revitalizing Our Democracy, has helped as well, but Kate's been the star. We're not using the word binding in Fair Vote Canada. Anita uses the words to act on the recommendations. So any wording like that makes sense to me. It's not, you can't just brush them aside and do something completely different once the Citizens Assembly has spoken, that's for sure. But I don't think you can ask elected officials who have a responsibility to do the professional, to do the right thing, to blindly accept everything that the Citizens Assembly has proposed. They will want to pass it through their judgment in some way. But if you've made it a multi-party process and you have committed to act on the recommendations, I think you're going to end up getting something pretty good. And particularly if you've also included the idea that the Citizens Assembly is open to recommending an incremental approach, if they think that would be the wisest way. By the way, one of the concerns that people might have about a Citizens Assembly, and they may not be able to articulate this, but they may be suspicious about it, is that a Citizens Assembly tends to propose fairly radical things. And the reason, I think one of the reasons is they're not actually responsible for the implementation. They don't have to worry about it. So however hard it might be, politically or otherwise, that's not their problem, right? So I think that's one of the reasons Citizens Assembly tend to propose fairly radical things. And that's where an invitation to do things incrementally, and that's where allowing the political process to maybe tweak things a bit in the early parts of it might make sense. What's really important to me is this issue of the ongoing citizens review process. I think that's something we need to insist upon. We can't just have a Citizens Assembly and then that's the end of it, whatever the government ends up proposing. If we have a minority government, which is I fully expect we'll have, this isn't going to happen if we have another conservative majority. So we'll end up having a minority. That helps a lot because then you have to have more than one party involved in the decision-making process, one way or another. So I think that will really help.
So there are a few questions talking about citizens' assemblies and how they have led to success in other places. Can you talk a little bit more generally about citizens' assemblies, Real?
Sure. Well, a citizens' assembly is a group of citizens that have been chosen in a sort of a structured random sample way. Letters are written to a whack of people and they're asked whether they would be interested. Kind of like when you form a jury, right? You do get an opportunity to say whether you're interested or not, or whether you're available or not. So in this case, you would express whether you're interested or not. So that's a filter right away. So you don't get people who absolutely don't care, don't give a damn about this issue. So I think that's probably a good thing. But they try to structure the sample in such a way that it represents the demographics of your general population and the geographical distribution of people as well. So in Ontario, if we had a citizens assembly, for example, it might have 125 people, one person per riding. You might have a rule that it's got to be 50-50 gender-wise, and all kinds of other rules as well. So obviously one person in each riding can't represent everybody in the riding, but when you mix and match, you should be able to get a pretty good picture of the general population. Those people then have a study period. They have a period for consulting with experts. They can call for more experts as well. The process is facilitated. You'll have a professional organization, whether a civil society organization or a business organization, but with a specialization in organizing this kind of thing. You can have public consultations as well to involve more people. It could be online, for example. And then a period of deliberation where they will discuss the different options. How detailed they get into their recommendations is something that needs to be established. I would say normally at least the broad outlines of whatever system that they're proposing. And if they can't get into all the details, they should propose a way of resolving those details. I don't think it should be left necessarily to politicians. That maybe they would recommend some sort of expert committee to iron out the details, for example. I think that's something you would expect of the Citizens Assembly to comment on that. And then I would expect in the future, they didn't do this in the past, but in the future, I would like to see this idea considered of whether they'd like to propose an incremental approach, and also whether they'd like to propose this kind of ongoing citizens review process. But that's me going beyond what Fair Vote Canada has done in the past, just elaborating on this idea and how it might work, getting all excited about it.
Okay, let's see. I think that what I'm also going to do is share the link to our webinars on referendums and on citizens assemblies, because there's a lot more sort of detailed information in those. Here's one that's a little bit different, Real. Could this not be an excellent opportunity to press Conservatives as the alternative if Del Duca wins? They could be seen as saving democracy if they present an alternative to Del Duca's system, which favors the Liberals.
If the Conservative propose an alternative?
That's what the question is.
That's the question?
The question is, do you see this as an opportunity to press Conservatives as the alternative if Del Duca wins? Yeah, sorry, I'm not really clear if they expect the opportunity to press the Conservatives if they win, or to press the Conservatives now as
Yeah. Well, I mean, people may have different views about this. I'm just simply not optimistic that the Conservatives are going to get on board, and that's why I've been calling for. People who know the work that I've been doing know that I've been calling for all three of the opposition parties to actually sign an agreement, and that's what this sample text there is that I have is what they would sign, an agreement to host a citizens assembly with an open mandate, and all these things that I talked about when I was saying calling for citizens assembly is not enough are included in there. But the signature lines include the three opposition parties. It doesn't include the Conservatives, because I don't think they'd come on board. They might come on board after the election. If they win a majority, it's game over. There's no way that we're going to get. I mean, this is my assessment, of probabilities. I don't think there's any chance that the Conservatives are going to invite a citizens assembly on electoral reform. Now, and if we get a Liberal majority, yeah, then I suppose we could get. They might try to ram through AV, but the likelihood that we're going to get a Liberal majority are like zero. It really is. So I don't worry about that too much. So suppose instead then that what we ended up with is a minority Liberal government, then you'll have the NDP and the Greens holding them to account. There's no way they're going to bring in AV. It's not going to work. So that's something we need to emphasize when we meet the candidates. This isn't going to happen, guys. Don't promise something that's not going to happen. You're just doing harm to yourselves, right? Now, would the Conservatives want to put something else forward? Yeah, you can bet they will. They're going to put a referendum forward. That's what's going to happen. So we need to be very strong in being able to oppose the idea of a referendum. And I think we'll succeed because I think all three of the other parties would oppose it.
Yeah, I think that's most of the questions answered here. Someone asked if there's a country with a permanent citizens assembly. I don't know if you want to speak to that, Real, or whether you prefer just to send them to the resources that are available on Citizens Assembly.
There's some stuff online. I think the only country that has a permanent citizens assembly right now is Belgium. But there are countries like France and the UK and Ireland, Scotland, not exactly a country, but you know what I mean, that have them quite frequently. Germany has them as well. So they've become quite common, but you know what? There haven't been very many specifically on the issue of electoral reform. We've had the two here in Canada, and elsewhere it's, there's sometimes it can be on constitutional reform, as in Scotland, but specifically on electoral reform, not so much. There's starting to be a lot more interest in the UK to have a citizens assembly, just like we are calling for a citizens assembly. And I actually was invited to make a presentation in February to a UK group, and that was pushing our citizens assembly idea pretty hard and talking to them about how, look, referendum's a way to kill electoral reform. Let's just be very clear about that. Yes, it worked in New Zealand. It worked in New Zealand for very, very special reasons that are not easily reproduced anywhere else. So they want to push back against the referendum idea there as well. And the way to do that is with citizens assembly.
Well, I think that's most of the questions here. We are at 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Ontario time. So I think we should maybe start wrapping it up. Is there anything else that you wanted to say in conclusion, Real, before we sign off? Yeah, just to answer the question that's come in now, the webinar of the recording will be made available, and we will send it out if you sign